Hi, folks. Welcome. Happy Earth Day. Thank you for joining us, CCA, tonight. We have a fantastic panel here to help us celebrate Earth Day. I'm going to give them brief introductions. Juliana Ciano is the program director at Reunity Resources, she's a social entrepreneur and educator, focusing on sustainable community food systems and holistic approaches to education. And Nate Downey is the author of the award-winning book, Harvest the Rain. Nate is a local permaculture designer, author, landscape contractor, columnist, water harvester, grassroots activist, and perennial panelist. And last but certainly not least is Charlie Schultz. His title is a bit of a mouthful. He's the lead faculty at Controlled Environmental Agriculture at the School of Trades, Technology, Sustainability and Professional Studies at our very own Santa Fe Community College. He began working with fish and plants as an undergraduate and has continued to make that his life's work and passion. So for those of you who've seen the film SeedingChange, you could see that much of it was focused on companies that were trying to do sustainable food production. So we wanted to use that as the jumping off point to talk to some local people here in Santa Fe who are involved in similar kinds of things. So my first question is for Charlie. You work in an area called aquaponics. Could you please explain to us what aquaponics is? Oh, I think you might be muted. Charlie, are you muted? You're muted.
Yeah.
There you go.
You know, I teach every day virtually, and you would think I'd know how to unmute myself. I take 5 points every time my students do that. And I see a couple are here tonight. So I'm looking forward to maybe we can get their input and see how this young generation is taking, they work with all of us here, Nate, Juliana, and myself. Aquaponics is something that we specialize at SFCC, that only 3 other schools in the nation offer this at the college level. And some of those programs I helped to create. So I came here with a lot of experience with aquaponics. I've worked with all the pioneers. Nate would call me a pioneer. So aquaponics, the word itself, if you break it down, is a combination of aquaculture, which is fish farming. Okay, they could include algae farming and such, but typically we know aquaculture as fish farming, and hydroponics is growing plants in water. And there's a lot of reasons we grow plants in water, but the water conservation of our systems is the main reason. This is an arid region. We don't have much water resources. So we apply hydroponic techniques for crop production. When we combine fish farming with growing plants in water, we end up with a symbiotic system where the fish take care of the plants and the plants filter the water, allow us to recycle it back to the fish. And I'll talk a little bit more tonight, but from my impression over 30 years, it's the most productive food system in terms of nutrient use and reuse and water conservation. I challenge everyone every year at these conferences to prove me wrong, and nobody can. So we're very tight on our water at SFCC through these aquaponic systems. I came to this as a fish farmer, and most people who end up in aquaponics successfully came as a fish farmer. And we understand that most people have an effluent disposal problem. When you do aquaculture, you have to get rid of your waste. But everybody on this panel, and probably everybody in the audience tonight, has this idea there is no waste. All right, everything is a resource. So we need to be looking at livestock effluents from livestock like cattle, pig, chicken, but I do it with fish. So I have a very tight closed loop. We don't waste any water. We don't waste any nutrients. All that fertilizer is conserved, and it allows us to produce food in a system that recycles 99% of our water every day. Never has to change the water. I've run systems for 13 years with the same water resources. So it's a very fascinating thing, and I'm glad to be here in Santa Fe and sharing it with the community. I have 2 students that are starting commercial ventures here in Santa Fe. So you're going to hear a lot more about aquaponics. I think the city is very supportive of these initiatives. So I hope to hear more. And I like to say that everything I do is recruiting. So I'm here tonight, and I will mention sfcc.edu. We have so many areas, as Jackie mentioned my title. That's a long title, but we have areas like algae production, biofuels, solar energy, the controlled environment agriculture. And so all of us work together, and we're working on this area called the food and water and energy nexus. So everything we do is focused on food, energy, and water. So if you talk to me about my food production, I'm going to talk to you about my recycle rates of my water, and I'm going to talk to you about the energy input and how we can maybe harness our own energy. The other thing I'll mention quickly, at SFCC, we have a new program in our area called Distributed Energy Systems. And it's for students who want to focus on the future of microgrids and nanogrids and smart grid technologies that interfaces this all together. We all saw in Texas what happened this year with the cold weather. We need to be working on more micro community energy systems, nanogrids, and for community resiliency. So food production is why I'm in that, for the resiliency, for community sovereignty. And thanks for your time, Jackie.
We're delighted you're here. I just have a little question just to clarify it. So there's vegetables and fish. So are the fish feeding off, are the vegetables that are harvested also in addition to the fish, or the vegetables are providing nutrients that the fish are eating? Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Sure, I feed the fish. I'm a fish farmer again, and most people dispose of this waste, or maybe they find a use of it, bringing it to a farm like Reunity Resource who could add it to their compost. But that's a disposal problem. That's an expensive way to handle your waste. Instead, when we look at things as a resource, we can find other ways to maybe monetize that. So maybe that was the initial goal, was we had waste, we needed to clean it up or save money from disposal. So we started combining these plants as a biofilter, kind of like a constructed wetland, but we're using tomatoes and cucumbers, and Nate will probably talk about lettuce and his production. So the fish provide free resources, the free nutrients for the plants. Without the plants cleaning the water, they're the biofilter, then I could use that water one time. But having this biofilter, the plants absorb all those toxic metabolites that could build up. They're using the nitrogen, phosphorus. Nate could tell you all 13 elements that plants need. That's a big focus on our programs at school. So it's a symbiotic relationship. Without the plants, the fish would not survive. The ammonia and the nitrates would be really elevated. Without the fish, the plants have no nutrients. So this is what we call a closed loop system. As I mentioned, 99% recycle rate. Some of the larger fish farms that are doing ecologically sound methods, what we call recirculating aquaculture, they use about 10% per day. And at school, we're using about 1% per day. And I just taught some of my students about my Canadian colleagues who have tightened that loop even tighter, and they replace 0.1% of their systems every day and produce commercial yields of vegetables and fish. And we don't support the fertilizer industry. I don't have any fertilizer on campus. I have some for our hydroponic systems, but these aquaponic systems, there's no 10-10-10, 20-20-20. It's fish feed, and then finding the plants that grow appropriately in that fish water. I'm not trying to tailor it and amend it. I'm not trying to buy outside sources. I want to find the plants and the fish that become a perfect marriage. And we're successful with that.
It's so exciting. I'm so encouraged to hear this, I have to say. So Juliana, you're this sort of Reunity Resources is the queen of composting and making waste a resource. Can you explain to us a little bit for people maybe who aren't familiar with Reunity Resources, how it got started and how you guys have a closed loop system over there?
Sure. I think if we're really talking about how it got started, we have to go back to what Charlie said about everything being recruitment for the community college. And my husband Tejinder was actually in the biofuels program at the community college and learning about how used cooking oil can be turned into biofuels. And that's not so much what we talk about because so many other programs have grown over the years, but that program still exists. It's been going for 10 years. Actually, this April is our 10-year anniversary as an entity. And so 10 years of collecting used cooking oil, which then gets turned into biodiesel. Biodiesel mimics petroleum diesel in a diesel engine. And most of that, so I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you probably all heard about, old Mercedes running on straight French fryer oil. And there were some books and some movies circulating about it. We have one of those cars. It does smell like French fries when you drive it. as diesel engine technology has changed, there are different filters and different systems inside that engine. And now what happens, rather than, of course, you'll always have the Willie Nelsons of the world running their French fryer fuel vans, but most biodiesel gets blended right in up to 5% with petroleum diesel. And any diesel that's being sold at the racks can have up to 5% biodiesel without even being labeled. So just like when ethanol started creeping into gasoline in the 90s, early 2000s, whenever that was happening, the same thing is happening with biodiesel. So that very clean, very renewable fuel is just getting blended in at a percentage. So that system still goes, but what we talk about more, like you mentioned, is compost. We collect food waste from schools and restaurants, about 1.5 million pounds a year.
Wow.
And turn that into compost on the old community farm here down in Agua Fria Village. And then that compost goes onto the farm, as well as sold to different farmers, landscapers, gardeners, people like you and viewers like you, um, and grows food. And so right here on the farm, and with some of the organizations that our farm has a farm stand on site. We also have a huge food equity mission. And so we donate a lot of the food that we grow to partner organizations that distribute food to those in need. Then we collect food waste from those same locations. So there's this very clear loop happening there, where we bring both the fresh veggies, and then we collect the scraps and the leftovers at the end of the week and bring that back, turn it into soil, and grow more food in it.
Fantastic, thank you. So Nate, as the author of Harvest the Rain and Roof Reliant Landscaping, and as a permaculture designer in New Mexico for almost 30 years, water harvesting is a cornerstone of your work. Can you tell us just a little bit more about that? Because I know that there tends to be some mixed information out in the world about water harvesting, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it can be depleting the aquifer. So can you talk to us, I gather, since you've written books about it, you are the man?
Sure, yeah. The best way to start with water harvesting is talk about the different types of water harvesting. And so rain, snow, sleet, hail, dew, fog, end up on the ground or on a roof. So when it ends up on the ground, we're typically going to harvest that in the soil itself. And it will ultimately percolate into aquifer in many cases, or it can help to control erosion here in the desert, especially when normally our rains come down, they're really strong and they create erosion. Instead, if we slow that water, allow it to sink into the ground and grow, as I say, slow it, flow it, grow it, grow plant material, that'll control erosion and keep the water that runs off our properties as light in pollution as possible. So it's really good for the people downstream to hold back that water for that period of time so you can get some plant material growing in that space. So passive water harvesting is in the soil. Active water harvesting is typically in a tank where you pump it out. That can be very expensive, or it can simply be a rain barrel under a canale or a downspout. And in a properly situated canale or downspout, it can be just simple gravity that then can water plant material below, or can be used back in the house as well. In the case of cisterns, say in Bermuda, there's a lot of, and in Roe Mesa for that matter, and various parts of New Mexico, there's a lot of people who live on rainwater, which is actively harvested, collected in a tank and pumped out, and typically filtered. Out in Australia for our honeymoon. Actually, no, this was in New Zealand. We had an experience where we had an incredible tour of this permaculture farm and a wonderful dinner, and all the food was grown locally. And we were drinking this wonderful ice water. And on the way back to our car, we were being walked to there with our host, and we saw his cistern. And I, very interested in cisterns at the time, and asked him to describe the filtration method. And he said, filtration? It ain't nothing but a pantyhose. And that was a wake-up call for me. And there's actually algae within tanks where, as long as you don't get light into a tank, that will clean the water for you. And so you don't really need much in terms of filtration most of the time. So, but there are certain cases where things that you don't want can grow. And so the state of New Mexico requires you to run an active water harvesting system that you're going to drink through a UV light to sterilize it. But there's also wastewater harvesting as well. So I like to think about the gray water, that is everything but the kitchen sink, and the everything but the kitchen sink, and of course the toilet would be gray water, and that can be harvested in the state of New Mexico legally if you follow certain guidelines without a permit. If you're going to harvest the black water, which is that toilet water and the kitchen sink, that will typically need a permitted system to harvest that, say, and to use it in the landscape, or even ultimately to reuse it in the house. It's totally possible to do that. You might want to do quite a bit of testing, but it's talk about closed loop systems. And then the fourth type of water harvesting I talk about is sort of on a community-wide stormwater scale, where people get together, and it's not just in their backyards, but it's communities getting together and harvesting water in rain gardens along the Santa Fe River, like the Santa Fe Rain Gardens program that's been going on for many years. And I think they have 30 rain gardens planned, and maybe 10 of them already installed along the river. And those are doing quite well for those of us in Santa Fe. But those are the four types of water harvesting. They're all legal in New Mexico, and they're all very good for the environment and for the people downstream as well.
I would think in New Mexico, living off of rainwater would be quite a challenge. I mean, given the really low rainfall, no?
That would depend on the size of your roof, and you would want a plan for a year like this, when people who are living on Roan Mesa are probably trucking in water to support that. But in certainly most years and average, or what we actually call normal years, you can, it's 12 inches of rain off 1,000 feet of roof provides 7,500 gallons. And so we get about 12 inches in Santa Fe. And so you would have to budget accordingly, and perhaps not have that big a landscape, or not even have much of a garden, if you're going to use that in the house and survive off it that way. It's certainly very difficult without aquaponics or hydroponics to get away with thinking that you're going to grow much of your own food and have enough water for your house only on the roof. That only using active water harvesting, that would be very difficult, because agriculture or plants and gardens take a lot of water. And so you typically have a well or some other system.
I want to encourage our audience, by the way, to please send us your questions in the chat, and we'd be happy to take questions from the audience. We encourage that, please. Love to hear from you. So back to you, Charlie. Fish farming in many ways has gotten a bad rep in the organic food world. And I guess my question to you is, do you think it deserves it? And how can we as consumers tell the difference between good and bad fish farming? Is there such a thing as good fish farming? Which, since you call yourself a fish farmer, I'm going to call you a good fish farmer. You're muted. You're muted. Unmute yourself.
That's
There you
minus 10 now, right? So the question, fish farming, let me just add on to what Juliana and Nate said, just for a couple points. So with Juliana, they do so much more than she just mentioned. One thing that they do is they're integral to helping my students. They offer internships to young students, whether it's a high school student or a college student. If you're passionate about sustainability, reach out to anyone here on the panel and you'll have opportunities. So there's plenty of opportunities there. And part of our collaborations was last year during COVID here in Santa Fe. I want to give Reunity Resources tremendous amount of credit for leading and really participating and leading these food distributions into our community systems. So a lot of the food that went to school children came through donations from farms in our region, including SFCC and Reunity Resources. Tejinder and Juliana made available their cooling space. That's a big issue on community food distribution, is who has the cold storage. I know there's some work going on now to identify those resources that we have in the community and how can we share those more together. Also with Nate, Nate was a student of mine, so he's also connected to SFCC. I had something here I really wanted to go with Nate. During COVID times, Nate was doing an internship as one of my independent students, and we were just doing an independent project where he was doing some market study, production trials in aquaponic systems and getting the food out to community. And he was doing a survey. So it was a market study. As part of that, Nate always had excess produce. If we grow 75 heads for the market, well, we have to grow 25 heads to account for some mortality or whatever. But Nate had really amazing success. And weekly, he was driving food and donating it to CIS, the group that we ended up donating with. So Nate started that whole connection there. And then as we ramped up production over the COVID we're done with that. Nate connected me with Juliana and other people, and we made this happen. So thank you, Nate, for all that. The other thing is, Nate, you were talking about cisterns and water collection. And my first question was, what is aquaponics? And as aquaponics started, it started because of water conservation needs. It started in two unique places. Where I was for 13 years was St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands. And the other place that pioneered aquaponics was Australia. And the reason it blossomed was because of the lack of water in these regions. Nate talked about water collecting, and St. Croix, for instance, we had rain, but it was seasonal rain. So when you get rain, you need to catch it and hold it. And that's what Nate's talking about. The expenses are there, and a lot of it is your storage. So we ended up on a very small island where land's not in supply. We dedicated a ½ acre to a rain catchment, and it was on a slight slope, and we were able to catch 900,000 gallons a year. So every bit of our research for 13 years was with pure rainwater. We didn't even use any groundwater or city water. It wasn't available. So sometimes when you have these challenging obstacles, you come up with solutions. And we like to say that our students are there creating the solutions for the future, whether it's to gender and biofuels. When biofuels was popular, and Tejinder and Luke and all these people in the community were populating these courses, that was when we were paying $4 for a gallon of gas, upwards of $5 a gallon of gas. And when fuel and energy resources are cheap, it seems like people in the community don't care about educating themselves. It's not till it hits their pocketbook and it's an impact on them individually, we see our classes full. My class is very popular, and we have a new greenhouse facility, and we're on the national map. So recruitment is not that hard for me, but during the COVID year, my enrollment almost doubled. So it shows that people in the community know that we need to focus on these, and COVID brought it to light, just like 9/11 brought things like this to light when we couldn't ship things in and we had to be resilient. Fish farming, I would say, does deserve a bad rep. When you look at the media and you see the sensational stories about the bad ways that people are fish farming, that's honest. The areas where they take down mangrove forest or mangrove swamps, which are our biofilters of everything coming off the land, many farms will just devastate those and put a shrimp farm there. Those kind of stories. There's a new documentary on Netflix. I'm not promoting Netflix over CCA, of course. But Seaspiracy is kind of a follow-up to Cowspiracy. Some of you may have seen that. And Cowspiracy kind of attacked the meat industry or showed the hidden side of it. Seaspiracy does the same. And I watched that documentary, and most people here have probably seen it. And I watched that documentary waiting for the good part, waiting for them to talk about the good fish farms. They went into fish farms a little bit, and they showed the destructive practices. They showed the big cages that are out in the open ocean, and the salmon are covered in sea lice. But there's certainly good examples. As I told you, I'm recycling 99% of our water. And my farmers that follow this method have 2 crops now. So there's a lot of benefits to doing aquaponics. The technology that is going to lead the way as far as sustainable fish production is called recirculating aquaculture systems. RAS, R-A-S. So that's a tank-based system.
Mhm.
It allows you to concentrate your effluents for reuse or disposal and not pollute the environment. We can grow a lot of fish in a small space. Some people are maybe against confinement and putting animals together, but fish are a unique animal that are a schooling animal, and they like higher stocking rates than lower stocking rates. I've done this 30 years, and if I try to reduce the stocking rates, they start to go into breeding behavior and territorial behavior, and they start to actually cause diseases on each other's and portals for diseases. But when you follow appropriate stocking rates, we put these fish in and they have a schooling behavior and they have this kind of docile behavior. We're typically at 99% survival rates with our fish because we care. That's a big part. A good fish farm should care about their fish and fish welfare. Part of the documentary there also showed that it's hard to trust labels, especially these third-party labels, sustainability, and whatever you want to call the next label. It seems like there's another one every day. And the documentary I watched there, The Seaspiracy, talked about there's a money scheme there as well. The more labels they sell, the more money they make. So the one label I look for here, because there is no local seafood, right? That's we're in aquaculture hell, is the way I was described when I reached here. We have no aquaculture industry, no fresh seafood. If you try to go catch fish, you have to be concerned about the environment that those fish were in. I don't know if I would not eat a fish out of Lake Cochiti. All right, for instance, I would have to go to very high headwaters of the Pecos to ensure that I have a clean fish. Our fish are clean. So the label that I'm looking for is domestic aquaculture. Here in the US, we have a law, and it's called the country of origin labeling. So when you look at your seafood in the supermarket, you see the country it came from. And a fish like tilapia, 90% of the tilapia in the world is produced in China. There's not a lot of safety regulations coming in across the border. Less than 1% of that's even inspected. So rightly so, I don't buy fish from China. They've been proven to contaminate their own products. But for instance, when I got here about 4 years ago, I went through Santa Fe looking at tilapia options. I've been a tilapia grower for almost 30 years. So what kind of value added packaging do you see with tilapia? I found over 60 product forms here in Santa Fe alone. At the same time, I looked at catfish because catfish used to be the mainstay for American catfish. And I went through all of Santa Fe and I saw 3 product forms of catfish. And it's a very similar white meat fish. It shows the marketing association for tilapia really took off. But when you look closely at those bags of your frozen fish, your fresh fish in the market, it always tells you where they came from. So I'm always looking for product of the USA, domestic USA product. Here's a unique label I saw the other day in Whole Foods. Tilapia, fresh tilapia, never frozen. Product of the USA, processed in Ecuador. Right, so this is the realities of economics. It's cheaper for this system to have a farmer in Arizona harvest all his fish, put them on ice and euthanize them on ice, send them to Ecuador where they have massive plants and labor, and they process these fish. It's a fresh fillet, and within 24 hours, it's back at Whole Foods in Santa Fe.
Well, the energy, the carbon footprint, that's painful. That's really
Exactly.
painful.
So what I'm looking for again is domestic aquaculture. That ensures that there was some kind of food safety regulations applied, HACCP plans. But then I'm looking for the local farmer. We should eat more fish. Your doctors are telling you to eat more fish. But the main reason I got into aquaponics is because I was afraid of our open systems. And this was in the late 80s. We started seeing medical waste wash up on our seashore. And so when you talk to me about wild fish versus farm fish, I'm like, well, where'd your wild fish come from? Was it swimming around the medical waste? I share with my students every week a new article about estrogens are being tested in the salmon off of Seattle Sound. Opioids are being tested off of our wild fish that we're bringing in. And this is because of humanity. We're putting birth control pills and opioids in our sewage systems, and everything goes downstream and then bioaccumulates in your fish. So, I would like people to start thinking about that when they say wild versus farmed. remember there are good examples of fish farms for healthy food production, and wild is not always good. Wild, if you watch these shows on Seaspiracy, if you eat wild fish, you're promoting the industrial fishing machine. And when you talk about plastics in the ocean, over 45% of the plastics in the ocean come from industrial fishing, dumping their nets overboard. The bycatch is just unbelievable. So farm fish doesn't participate in that, and we're trying to find other ways to do this. One of the bottlenecks is that fish meal is required in almost all fish diets. So the way I say it, we have to go catch fish so we can feed fish so we can eat fish. So a good fish farm and a good fish choice would be to look at a fish that feeds low on the trophic level, that can eat a potential all plant-based diet, or insects or algae. And some of your carnivore fish, I'm sure there's some people here that love tuna. My wife loves tuna, but that has a feed conversion ratio of about 20-1 out in the wild. They eat 20 pounds of fish so they can gain 1 pound so we can eat that 1 pound of tuna. All these things I think about daily, and we need to all think about the 7 billion people on our planet. I'm a
Yes,
very
exactly.
globalist, but I do also like these initiatives that we've seen here in Santa Fe, the economics of happiness, and focusing back on local vision instead of this globalization. But I do think we need to think about the resource use because of the growing population. I remind my students that just in my lifetime, population has doubled from 3.5 billion to 7 billion, and we're on that exponential curve. So again, thanks for bringing movies like this one today that everybody saw to the community, so we can start helping support businesses. Like Nate has a business coming. You've mentioned Reunity Resources. I'm a believer in supporting those who support us. So thanks again.
Yeah, we're delighted. So Juliana, Reunity Resources, you get waste from a lot of schools and businesses. Do you have tips sort of for the consumer on what they can be doing themselves for composting and trying to create their own? They probably can't do a closed loop at home, but close to it. Do you have some tips for the audience?
Yeah, there's lots you can do. And right now is a great time because actually Santa Fe County, so if you live in the county but outside of city limits, you're the target for a program that we're partnering with the county sustainability department on, where you can go to that page, just type in Santa Fe County Sustainability Department, and your options will crop up, and you can apply to have us come and install a backyard composting system for you at your house. So you don't need to drive anywhere. If you're closer, inside city limits, we have a drop-off program right at our farm outside our gate. It's 24/7 access now. So we encourage people to make a membership donation to support the efforts that we're putting in, but then you can bring anything that used to be alive. And even as I say that, I'm like, once we have, we have found people's pet chickens. When I say we accept meat, I mean like stuff that comes out of your kitchen. But because we have a commercial scale composting system that heats to a minimum, the industry standard is 131 degrees Fahrenheit for 72 hours straight. We can compost meat, bones, dairy, and kind of like annoying things like Charlie was talking about labels. Compostable is like a very elusive and annoying label where a lot of people will say, or a lot of products will say biodegradable on it. And that doesn't mean anything. That means that could mean in 20 million years, it's like and so there's only one label to look for in that, and it's BPI certified compostable. And any wares, and of course the restaurants we work with use those wares so that your compostable forks, spoons, coffee cups, sleeves, whatever they are, can break down in our facility as well. So you can drop off your food waste here. You can sign up for the county program. There are lots of fun, if you're not eligible for that county program, there are lots of fun systems you can do at home too, just on your own. And I see a question in the chat here about compostable produce bags really composting safely. And in our system, they do. I wouldn't recommend it at home because most home composting is what we would call cold composting, meaning it doesn't hit that 131 degrees we recommend and encourage people to use red wiggler worms in their home composting.
Red wiggler worms?
Red, it's like a tongue twister. Say it 5 times fast. Red wiggler worms.
Uh-huh.
And those are just, they're different than ground worms that would come up after a rainstorm. Red wiggler worms, especially like much of the same foods that humans like. They also like to exist at the same ambient temperatures as humans. So that worm pile compost system is going to be, you know, around 70 degrees internally. And they will break down so much of your food waste. But worms don't, like feeding worms is a different thing than a hot compost pile where plastic can break down. So you wouldn't.
Ah, right. So those little green compostable,
What was that?
those little green compost bags, they actually,
They
for
do.
for cold compost, they won't work.
In a cold compost, they won't. If you're doing things at home, I just encourage people to keep it to fruit and vegetable scraps. But at our large scale, hot, aerobic commercial facility, that's where all of these other things can get diverted. And on a national scale, that's about 40% of what's in the average household trash can. So you know, it can be your paper towels, it's your, you know, your cooked chicken carcass, whatever. You know, it's almost half your trash can. So when you're looking at what can I do on an individual level, we tend to kind of hyper focus on things like straws, or like in Santa Fe, glass recycling gets a huge bad, you know, like, oh, it's so inconvenient and they're not doing anything with it. And just from a sort of pie chart perspective, municipal solid waste, 4% is glass, 40% compostable. So if we're choosing where to focus our energy, that's another reason that we find compost to be a really hopeful place to focus our energy, is that it's really like a wide brush stroke that can make a big difference right in your backyard, or with a community scale compost system like ours.
Thank you. I know that we've started composting. I'm afraid we have been using those green bags, but we'll stop now. But it's been amazing for us to see just how little trash we end up with when we collect all this compost. It's really interesting. So Nate, you had mentioned in one of our conversations that you think there needs to be paradigm shift around the whole issue of closed loop systems and sustainable food production. Could you tell us what you mean by that? What is the big paradigm shift?
I would like to do that, but I wanted to just follow up with what Charlie said about tilapia, since I am one of his students, and I have been for a while, actually. I took a class with him in 2017, which really changed my life, and I decided I was going to do much less permaculture design for other people and become a aquaponics farmer. But it's taken me a while to find property, and I think I finally have. And but with respect to the fish that feed on the tropic level, I think you forgot to tell everyone, although some people in the audience probably know, that tilapia, which is the fish of choice for aquaponics because it survives quite well at the temperatures of the water temperatures that the plants like, it happens, and we're lucky really, it happens to be a fish that can survive on a vegetarian diet. And in fact, the fish feed that is used at the Santa Fe Community College is, I think, 95% corn and beans. And so I'm not sure what the other 5% is. Might be a little bit of fish, but 5% of the feed in the fish is a low percentage, if that's what it is. And so, but with respect to the paradigm shift, and this came up in the movie quite a bit, actually, the notion of let's skip the middleman. And so when I was taking these classes with Charlie and deciding, okay, I want to be a aquaponics farmer, I was doing the math. Okay, got to build a greenhouse or get some land, build a greenhouse, and then I'm going to sell it at the farmer's market, or I'm going to sell it at to restaurants or maybe grocery stores. And none of those, well, the farmer's market is an exception to that, but the restaurants and the grocery stores can't pay a retail price. And so I thought, well, how could I get a retail price? And I could do the farmer's market as a possibility. It seems like there's a lot of labor associated with kind of getting to the farmer's market, setting up, sitting around and hoping that enough people are going to buy from you during those few hours that it's open. And if it's bad weather, you're going to have a lot of extra lettuce, in my case, to do something with. And that seemed a little bit of a risk. And so then I took a break from aquaponics and ran for city council, and I did a lot of door-to-door knocking and ended up just going into neighborhoods and realizing how easy it was to go to people's doors and either drop some literature or have a conversation with them and then move on to the next door. And I started formulating that into perhaps maybe what we need to do with some of this local food that can be grown 365 days a year, that's fresh, it needs to get to people quickly. Maybe we could deliver it to the door like the milkman of days of yore. And so I took some, really internships as well with Charlie and Pedro at the college, and I realized that there was quite a bit of food successfully coming off of these systems, and we were able to give it to or sell it, I think, I'm not sure, to trade with a cafeteria at the college. But then when Christmas vacation or the holidays came around, we had some extra food and what to do with it. So it was right before COVID, about January, I said, guys, of last year, I said, I've got this idea. When the cafeteria is no longer taking our lettuce, say this summer, I could do a project to see if people could get into the idea of getting food delivered to their door straight from the farm in little neighborhoods, where it'd be, you'd go in for an hour, deliver, and you wouldn't do a whole lot of driving around town and that kind of thing. And they said, sure, it's be great, but it's bigger than that because for not sure what reason, the cafeteria didn't want the lettuce. It was probably too much labor to cut it up, and it's easier to buy from a big truck and a big supplier. But those were just theories. I never figured that out, or never even got into research on that. But my point is that these guys let me do a whole project. Charlie let me do this whole project where I grew food at the college and gave it to people for free, and they provided responses to surveys about the lettuce and whether they like the packaging or whether they like the timing of the delivery, whether they like the flavor. And incidentally, 88% of the people, and I had 225 people participating in this, 88% loved the flavor and 12% liked the flavor, and nobody was indifferent to the flavor and nobody disliked the flavor. And so we've this aquaponics does grow an incredible product, and the paradigm shift though really is more, I mean, aquaponics is a paradigm shift on some other level, because really it's people call it soilless, but it's actually particles of soil floating around in the water that and we could get into that whole thing. But so aquaponics is really a new way of farming, as big as the plow, I really think. But the paradigm shift on the business side is going from farm to home and delivering right to the door without a middleman. And I think that's going to work. I will let you know about a year from now, I hope, be by then distributing. And that's the paradigm shift that I see occurring.
Thank you. Well, so along those lines of a paradigm shift, Charlie, you had mentioned that you think there needs to be an alternative economic model to the profit-based system, which certainly dominates in the U.S. and pretty much of the world. So did you want what alternative system did you have in mind?
Well, I'm going to share a link before the session's over here for a publication that's came out of the EU recently. A lot of the EU researchers got together and they brought in North American experts. I was over there, a few of my colleagues, teaching them this whole new field of aquaponics, and they've really launched in every country across the EU at the graduate level, and they're doing a lot of work. So I'm going to share with everybody a free textbook that's pretty deep. It's not the basic, what is aquaponics? You could do that in one of my Saturday crash courses. I do those continuing ed type classes at the college. But this, as we read this, this is a lot of fish farmers thinking this, but everybody I talk to in different fields, whether it's Juliana and Tajender or Trevor over there, and they all work in such diverse areas, or Nate and other business models that are about to develop. I'd like to read a quote that I share with my students this book. So, and I think that this applies to a lot of food systems. They say here, thus, a major global challenge is to shift the growth-based economic model towards a balanced eco-economic paradigm that replaces infinite growth with sustainable development. My students are branching out and having their own evening sessions where they can talk about things like food justice and these new paradigms of how we may have food systems. One thing that always crushes me is food waste. And I know, Juliana, you're doing a lot at that restaurant level and the home level. I get disappointed when I see food waste on the farm level, that we grow the food and we can't distribute it. It doesn't get to the end user before it has to go to waste. So I know my students are talking about how can we take this technology of greenhouses, water conservative methods that are very food productive, but somehow get that food into the right people who can't afford it. All of the people in New Mexico that are malnutritioned. So what can we do for that? If we can take profit out of it, then that food can go right into systems. One of my other students has a business that's going up as an indoor facility, an indoor aquaponic farm you'll hear more about. He's looking at systems like school to cafeteria, farm to cafeteria, farm to school, farm to hospitals, military complexes, all these industrial kind of corporate. You could look at Amazon. You could do any of these kind of distributions to a large facility where you go in and all your food's going to be used. It's all going to the students. There's not a way like, oh, damn, I didn't sell 100 of my heads today. It has to go in the compost. So I think that's a problem. We produce more than we can distribute. So part of that's the paradigm shift. But if we can look at the money system of it all. And part of the documentary that we're sharing here tonight for everyone to watch, that money trickling down to the lowest employee. So an equitable share. We talk about that now. There's this whole new movement, right, in Santa Fe and New Mexico that cannabis is going to be legal. Nate just said about the demands on just the backyard gardener and the water use. I'm very concerned when I see this legislation pass through with not a lot of even thought on the water constraints. So this is a very big concern, is water use. And so that's another paradigm shift, I would say. I work with a lot of natives. I work with traditional people here, Seiki associations, and I understand traditional ways of farming. In many cases, we can't do that 365 days a year. Like Nate said, we have to step into controlled environments. We have to step into water conservative methods if we're going to survive here. So these are new paradigm shifts that we have to look at. And as Juliana and I are saying, there is no waste. So these loops have to continue. Let me give you an example we talk about in class, that we start our aquaponic systems with fish feed. That's it, right? We have a 99% water recycle rate. So with that fish feed, I get fish, I get protein, and I choose tilapia because if you look at resources, the feed conversion ratio is what you're looking at. How much feed resources does it take to get flesh? And tilapia has one of the lowest of all animals. So you come down from beef that may have a 13-to-1 feed conversion ratio all the way to a fish where it's possible to get 1-to-1. And if you grow outdoors in a pond and they eat insects and algae, you can get less than 1-to-1. So we need to be putting our resources in wisely. The other thing, our quality of our produce, Nate talked about. And when Nate talks about that, I always think about who the heck ever comments about the taste of their lettuce. And he got rave reviews about the taste of his lettuce. One thing that we do to get a quick kind of an identifier potentially of nutrient quality is a Brix reading. And we can take a little juice out of any fruit or vegetable, and I can look at it under a refractometer and get a relative scale of quality. And I can go look at a comparison table The other day, we do blackberries. We do blackberries and hydroponics, completely in water. I've had an elder from Santa Clara Pueblo come into my greenhouse and see my berries, which are traditional foods for her, and she was crying. Our berries are booming in January and February, but the quality was at the excellent end. You couldn't get much higher on the quality. The chefs in Santa Fe, when they come see us, they rave about our food. And I think a lot of that is the freshness. To get, say, let's say an organic strawberry at Whole Foods or Sprouts, that was grown in California. They've picked the strawberries, they put it in cold storage. It didn't sell in California, so they trucked it over. It didn't even sell in Arizona, so they trucked it over to us. It's been sitting in the back of the supermarket. Now it comes out. It may be organic, but it's not fresh anymore. And as soon as you pick a produce off the vine, it starts to lose nutritional quality. So to have these greenhouses and food production systems in northern New Mexico is resiliency. It's how we're going to survive.
Is aquaponics growing across the country? You mentioned that the EU is taking it up in quite a big way. Is it growing across in the US?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on exponentially growing. And about 7 years ago, I went back to grad school, and my aquaculture leaders of the US, they said, you know, about 3 of every 4 calls we get now is for aquaponics. What it also allows, it's a perfect model: fish, plants, a closed loop. Jackie, you're talking a lot tonight about closed loops. And so when we can close the loop, we can start to study it. And these can be models within science and education from high school, or actually I've done from elementary school on up, because they're closed loop. And we can have one variable and we can look at the dynamics, and we can have replicates, and we can really prove things. To really understand what's happening in soil, for instance, is incredibly complex. And an outdoor system, especially, so many variables come into play. So a lot of my students are young. I do a lot of dual credit programming here in Santa Fe region and all across northern New Mexico. So the young students understand this, right? They grew up with the crises. I try to remind them, when I show them this picture from 1988 with medical waste washed up on our seashore, I said, you all see this every day now. In 1988, this was big news. This was the first beach to even seem to have plastic on it. So we've really destroyed our environment and the quality of food. I don't trust open systems, and that's why we focus on CEA. We also talk a lot about the organic label and the organic movement. I'll remind the listeners here, we have no organic fish regulations in the US. No farmer can grow an organic fish. So you really need to know the farm. But the US does have strict regulations on fish production. So again, looking for that domestic label is the best thing you can do.
Juliana, there's been a lot of stuff on the side at the chat here about bag tags, which I haven't really been able to focus on. Can you just
Sure,
you explain a little bit about what that is?
So yeah, so the quick on that is, if you're applying for this county compost system install, one of the questions on the application says, what's your bag tag number, or what's your solid waste permit number? So if you live in the county in New Mexico, because we're so vast and like our population is spread out, our recycling and solid waste systems are what we call a hub and spoke. So in smaller areas like in Hakona or in El Dorado, there are these little spoke drop-off sites for your trash and recycling. And as part of the county's management of this program, their goal is to target people who are using these sites, with the idea being that if they're encouraging people who are dropping off trash at these small sites and helping those people be capacitated to compost, it's a weird verb, sounds like decapitated, but but to help people who are bringing their waste to the county drop-off facilities to compost, it will lower the weight of that waste, and it will lower the transportation and and so that's where that question comes from. And if you don't have one of those things, but you do live in the county outside of city limits, I would encourage you to still apply. Right.
Okay, that's great. Do we have any more questions from the audience? We have all kinds of, I can see Charlie and people, I encourage you all to look in the chat. There's been all kinds of great resources posted in there. But we Jackie, have time for one more question. If there's anything.
If I could
Yeah.
address real quick, somebody had said something about the nutrient conservation, the reuse of nutrients. So everybody in the audience should look up this idea of the limiting P. We're running out of phosphorus on our planet. We need to be reusing waste. We need to be reusing livestock waste. We need to be rendering bones. A lot of our phosphorus that we mine is now in bones of livestock and bones of people. We need to be reusing that, right? I'm all about that human composting thing. I'm all for that. I'm going to sign up soon, but we can't throw our phosphorus in the landfill. We're running out. Look what happened in Florida over the last couple of weeks with these ponds that are breaking the banks. That's all a result from phosphorus mining, and that's a toxic waste. So we need to use our resources much more conservatively and recycle as much as possible. Thanks.
I think we're just about at the limit here. Any final thoughts, Nate or Juliana?
I just encourage everybody to be in touch. Come down to the farm. We'll be opening May 8th with a seedling sale. May 9th, we're having a Mothers and Caregivers Day brunch. But come down, chat. We're always like, this is what we're here for and what we all need this year after a year of Zooming and being in isolation. Come down, volunteer, get your hands dirty. Let's talk about your ideas and let's collaborate.
I would just say there's a great new tree program in Santa Fe. My wife's a big part of it. It's called Tree Smart Santa Fe. And if you want to do some tree planting on the 30th, April 30th, down in Tierra Contenta, there's a park called Rancho del Sol Park. And it'll be a fun thing for people to do and get involved. And if you don't do it there, plant a tree somewhere.
Nice.
I can't thank you all enough. This has been a terrifically inspiring evening. It's so refreshing to get so much energy around solutions and not all sort of leaving incredibly depressed, like we want to slit our throats at the state of the world. So thank you so much for joining us and helping us to make a really great Earth Day celebration. So thank you all. Thank you to the audience. And
thanks to the CCA. My gosh,
Thanks,
you
CCA.
guys. Wow. This is great. How
And
to
keep doing this
redefine
for us.
art.
Keep
I
doing
love
it.
it.
So we're all together in the
Absolutely.
plaza there again outside after live screening. That's gonna be
Yeah, we look
It's an
forward.
essential resource for our community is the CCA.
Thank you. It's our pleasure.
We'll
It's
see you
our
in
pleasure.
person next time, okay?
Absolutely. Thanks again, folks. Good night.